Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Shyness and Social Anxiety Workbook, Proven Step-by-Step Techniques for Overcoming Your Fear, by Martin M. Antony, Ph.D., and Richard P. Swinson, M.D. Narrated by Graham Rowat. Publisher's Note: the bonus content for this audiobook, including worksheets and worksheet examples, can be found at newharbinger.com/33407. Introduction. Shyness and social anxiety are universal. Almost everyone has felt nervous speaking in front of a group or awkward when interacting with another person. We wonder if a presentation went well, or whether we made a good impression on a first date or during a job interview. Even some celebrities, who make their living in the public eye, have been described, often by themselves, as being excessively shy in certain situations or at particular points in their lives. Here is a partial list. For more details, check out shakeyourshyness.com/shypeople.htm. David Bowie, musician. Mary Chapin Carpenter, musician. Harrison Ford, actor. Kim Kardashian, television personality. Nicole Kidman, actor. Lady Gaga, musician. David Letterman, talk show host. Abraham Lincoln, American president. Michelle Pfeiffer, actor. Brad Pitt, actor. J.K. Rowling, author. Kristen Stewart, actor. Barbra Streisand, Carly Simon, and Donny Osmond have all spoken openly about their struggles with anxiety and how it affected their ability to perform musically. In fact, Donny Osmond served as an honorary member of the board of directors of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, saying, "I've talked to so many people who were unwilling to do anything about their anxiety disorder because they were too embarrassed. I want to let people know that they are not alone and that help is available." adaa.org/Donny-Osmond. Even radio personality Howard Stern has described himself as being painfully shy when he is outside the safe confines of his on-air studio. Shyness and social anxiety can range in intensity, from very mild to completely incapacitating. In extreme cases, they may prevent an individual from developing friendships, working, or even standing in a public place. Regardless of whether your fears are minor or completely overwhelming, the strategies described in this book are designed to help you deal more effectively with shyness and social anxiety. We recommend that you listen to the chapters in this workbook in order. The initial chapters are designed to educate you about the nature of shyness and social anxiety and to teach you how to evaluate the main features of your own personal form of them. Then we discuss the costs and benefits of different treatment approaches and help you to select from among the many that are available. Subsequent chapters provide detailed information about different treatment strategies, including medications, cognitive strategies for changing anxiety-provoking thoughts, exposure strategies for confronting the situations you fear, mindfulness and acceptance-based strategies to change the way you relate to your feelings and thoughts, and strategies for fine-tuning your communication and performance skills. The final chapter discusses strategies for maintaining the improvements you've made. This book is different from other self-help books in a number of ways. Of the many books on social anxiety and shyness that you will find online or in your local bookstore, this is one of the few written in a workbook format. It is filled with exercises and practices designed to teach you basic strategies for overcoming shyness and social anxiety. We encourage you to fill in the blank worksheets and forms referenced throughout the text and found in this book's bonus materials. We invite you to download copies for your personal use so you can continue to use them over the coming months. These downloadable forms are available at this book's website, newharbinger.com/33407. This book also differs from others in that the strategies we recommend have all been investigated extensively in well-designed clinical studies. In addition to specializing in helping people deal more effectively with their shyness and social anxiety, we also are actively involved in research on the nature and treatment of anxiety. It is well established that when people use the techniques described in this book in a therapeutic setting, they generally experience a significant decrease in social and performance anxiety. Essentially, we took strategies that have proven useful in therapy and adapted them for the self-help format. However, you don't need a therapist to administer the strategies. Research has shown that our self-help approach, based on the previous edition of this book, can effectively reduce shyness and social anxiety. This workbook is designed to be used alone or coupled with regular visits to a professional therapist. In fact, having a good reference that our own clients and patients can use as they progress through therapy was a motivation for us to write this book. We thoroughly updated this third edition with the latest scientific knowledge and references concerning the nature and treatment of shyness and social anxiety. For example, we added a new section on the role of hormones, such as cortisol and oxytocin, to Chapter 2 to reflect recent developments in our understanding of their possible involvement in shyness and social anxiety. We also revised Chapter 5 to include the latest information on medications, including new antidepressants, anticonvulsants, and antipsychotics, which have recently been studied for treating social anxiety. We clarified the information in some sections and completely rewrote those that were out of date, adding many new examples and illustrations. Chapter 9, on mindfulness and acceptance-based strategies, is brand new to this edition as well. Finally, we entirely updated the resources at the end of the book. Your journey to overcoming shyness and social anxiety may not be easy. You will overcome some aspects of your fear more easily and quickly than others. Also, for every 2 or 3 steps forward, you may experience what feels like a step back. Nevertheless, research has shown that most people will experience a reduction in their social and performance fears if they consistently use the techniques described in this book. With hard work and perseverance, these techniques will provide you with the opportunity to make big, positive changes in your life. Part 1. Understanding your social anxiety. Chapter 1. What are shyness and social anxiety? Hannah was a 26-year-old woman who worked as an assistant manager of a small bookstore. She was referred to our anxiety treatment and research clinic to get help for intense anxiety about her upcoming wedding. Hannah wasn't afraid of being married. In fact, she looked forward to spending years together with her husband. She was terrified of the wedding itself. The idea of being on display in front of such a large audience was almost unthinkable. In fact, she had postponed her wedding twice before because of her fear of being the center of attention. Hannah's anxiety involved more than just a fear of her wedding. She reported that she'd always been shy, even when she was very young. When she was in high school, her anxiety around people became so intense that it affected her school life. She was convinced that her classmates would find her dull or boring, or that they would notice her anxiety and assume that she was incompetent. Typically, Hannah avoided doing oral reports at school and didn't take any classes in which she felt her classmates might observe or judge her performance, such as physical education. On a few occasions, she even asked for special permission to hand in a written essay instead of doing a presentation in front of the class. Despite being an excellent student, she tended to be very quiet in class, rarely asking questions or participating in discussions. Throughout college, Hannah found it difficult to make new friends. Although people enjoyed her company and often invited her to parties and other social events, she rarely accepted the invitations, preferring to keep in touch through texting and social media. She had a long list of excuses to get out of socializing. She was comfortable with only her family and a few longtime friends, and aside from them, she usually avoided contact with other people. After college, Hannah began working at a bank, and after a short time she was promoted to assistant manager. She was always comfortable dealing with customers, and she gradually became more comfortable talking to coworkers. However, she avoided eating lunch with colleagues, and she never attended any social events, including the bank's annual holiday party. Hannah lived with her social anxiety for years, despite how it interfered with her education, work, and social life. It wasn't until the anxiety prevented her from having the kind of wedding she and her fiancé wanted that she decided to seek help. Hannah's story is not that different from those of other people who experience intense feelings of shyness, social anxiety, and performance-related fears. The types of anxious beliefs and behaviors that she reported are similar to those that many socially anxious people describe. After her evaluation at our clinic, Hannah began a 12-session course of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and gradually learned to cope with her anxiety more effectively. By the end of treatment, her avoidance of social situations had decreased significantly, and Hannah was much more comfortable in situations that previously made her very anxious. CBT involves 1. Identifying the thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to negative feelings, such as anxiety, and 2. Teaching people new ways of thinking and behaving to better manage their anxiety. This book will teach you the CBT strategies commonly used to treat social anxiety. Before exploring them, however, we will begin this chapter in the same way we usually begin treatment with the individuals we see in our program, by offering an overview of the nature of fear and anxiety in general and of social anxiety in particular. Anxiety, worry, fear, and panic. Everyone knows what it feels like to be afraid. Fear is a basic human emotion. In humans, fear is controlled in part by an area of the brain called the limbic system. This system includes some of the deepest, most primitive structures of the brain, structures shared by many less evolved animals. In fact, there is reason to believe that the emotion of fear is present across most, if not all, animal species. Most organisms display specific patterns of behavior when confronted with danger, and often these fearful behaviors include forms of aggression or escape. Therefore, the intense feelings we experience when we are exposed to an immediate danger often are referred to as the fight-or-flight response. Although most people use the terms anxiety and fear interchangeably, behavioral scientists who study emotions assign somewhat different meanings to these and other related terms. Anxiety is a future-oriented feeling of dread or apprehension associated with the sense that events are both uncontrollable and unpredictable. In other words, anxiety is a nagging feeling that occurs when a person believes a negative event may occur in the future and nothing can be done to prevent it. People who feel anxious tend to dwell upon and ruminate about the possibility of danger. The tendency to dwell on future negative events is called worry. Anxiety is also associated with uncomfortable physical feelings, such as arousal, for example, sweatiness, increased pulse, tension, for instance, tight muscles, and pain, such as headaches. There is no question that when anxiety is too intense, it can interfere with performance. However, mild to moderate amounts of anxiety are actually helpful. If you never became even slightly anxious under any circumstance, you probably wouldn't bother doing the things that must be done. Why would you bother preparing an assignment on time, dressing nicely for a date, or eating healthy food if you weren't concerned about the consequences of not doing these things? In part, it is anxiety that motivates us to work hard, prepares us for challenges, and protects us from possible threats. In contrast to anxiety, fear is a basic emotion that occurs when an individual is confronted with an immediate, real, or imagined danger. Fear leads to a sudden, intense physiological alarm reaction that essentially has one purpose: to get the person away from the danger as quickly as possible. When people feel fearful, their bodies go into overdrive to ensure that escape is fast and successful. Heart rate and blood pressure increase to transfer blood to the large muscles, Breathing quickens to improve the flow of oxygen throughout the body. People sweat to cool off the body and perform more efficiently. In fact, all of these symptoms of arousal and fear are designed to make escape easier, allowing for survival in the face of danger. Panic attack is the clinical term used to describe intense fear that occurs even though no realistic danger is actually present. Panic attacks can be triggered by specific situations that people fear. For example, giving an oral presentation, being in a high place, seeing a snake. And sometimes they occur out of the blue, without an obvious trigger. We discuss panic attacks in more detail later in this chapter. To summarize, fear is an emotional reaction to an immediate danger, whereas anxiety is a state of apprehension about some future threat. For example, worrying about giving a presentation that is a week away is anxiety, whereas experiencing an adrenaline rush while in the midst of giving a presentation is more likely fear. Here are a few points to remember. Anxiety and fear are normal emotions everyone experiences from time to time. Anxiety and fear are time-limited. Even though they feel as though they may continue forever, their effects always decrease over time. Anxiety and fear have a helpful function in that they prepare you for future threats and protect you from danger. So, your goal should not be to rid yourself of all fear and anxiety. Rather, your goal should be to reduce your anxiety to a level that no longer interferes significantly with your life. What is a social situation? A social situation is any situation involving you and at least one other person. Social situations can involve interacting with others. These are often referred to as interpersonal situations, or can involve you being the focus of attention or being noticed by others. These are often called performance situations. Here are some examples of interpersonal and performance situations that people with high levels of social anxiety may fear. Interpersonal situations. Asking someone out on a date. Talking to someone in authority. Initiating or maintaining a conversation. Going to a party. Playing an interactive game online. Having friends over for dinner. Meeting new people. Talking on the telephone. Sending a text or an email. Expressing a personal opinion. Having a job interview. Interacting with others on social media. For example, Facebook. Being assertive. For example, saying no when you don't want to do something. Returning an item to a store. Sending back food in a restaurant. Making eye contact. Performance situations. Public speaking. Speaking in meetings. Playing sports or participating in aerobics. Driving in front of others. Performing a piano recital. Having others watch you work. Leaving a recorded message on somebody's voicemail. Getting married. Acting on a stage. Having someone else review your online profile. Reading out loud in front of others. Eating or drinking in front of others. Using public bathrooms with others in the room. Writing while others watch. For example, completing a form in public. Making a mistake in public. For example, falling down, dropping your keys, and so on. Walking or jogging on a busy street or some other public place. Introducing yourself to a group of people. Shopping in a busy store. What is social anxiety? Social anxiety refers to nervousness or discomfort in social situations, usually because of fear about doing something embarrassing or foolish, making a bad impression, or being judged critically by others. For many people, social anxiety is limited to certain types of social situations. For example, some people are very uncomfortable in formal work-related situations, such as presentations and meetings, but are quite comfortable in more casual situations, such as parties and social events with friends. Others may exhibit the opposite pattern, finding formal work situations easier than unstructured social gatherings. In fact, it's not unusual for celebrities to be quite comfortable performing in front of large audiences, but to be shy and nervous interacting with people one-on-one or in small groups. Do an internet search of shy celebrities to find numerous lists of socially anxious performers. The intensity of social anxiety and the range of feared social situations vary from person to person. For example, some people experience manageable fear, whereas others are completely overwhelmed by the intensity of their fear. For some people, their fear is limited to a single social situation, for example, using public restrooms, public speaking, whereas others experience social anxiety in almost all social situations. Social anxiety is related to a number of common personality styles and traits, including shyness, introversion, and perfectionism. People who are shy often feel uncomfortable in certain social situations, particularly when they involve interacting with others or meeting new people. Compared to people who are extroverted or outgoing, individuals who are introverted tend to be quieter and more withdrawn in social situations, and may prefer being alone. However, introverted people may not necessarily be anxious or fearful when socializing. Finally, the trait of perfectionism is associated with a tendency to hold overly high standards for oneself that are difficult or impossible to meet. Perfectionism can lead people to feel anxious in public for fear that others will notice their flaws and judge them negatively. We discuss perfectionism later in this chapter. How common is social anxiety? It is difficult to obtain accurate estimates of the prevalence of social anxiety because different studies define social anxiety differently and used different questions when interviewing people about anxiety. Also, social anxiety is not something that one either has or doesn't have. Rather, it exists on a continuum, rating from very low to very high. In fact, researchers have consistently found that almost all of us experience shyness and social anxiety from time to time. For example, in a survey of more than 1,000 people from across the United States and elsewhere, psychologist Philip Zimbardo and colleagues found that 40% currently consider themselves to be chronically shy, to the point of it being a problem. Another 40% reported that they had previously considered themselves to be shy. 15% considered themselves to be shy in some situations, and only 5% reported that they were never shy. Researchers have also studied the prevalence of social anxiety disorder, a condition associated with extreme social anxiety that we will describe later in this chapter. The most comprehensive study to date involved a survey of more than 9,000 Americans, in which about 12% had experienced, at some point, the symptoms necessary to receive a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder. In fact, this study found social anxiety disorder to be the fourth most prevalent psychological problem after depression, alcohol abuse, and specific phobias. For example, phobias of animals, blood, needles, heights, flying, and so on. Other researchers have found the prevalence of social anxiety disorder to be lower than 12%, but almost all studies confirm that social anxiety disorder is a common problem. Differences between men and women. Shyness and social anxiety are common in both sexes, although most studies have found that social anxiety disorder is slightly more prevalent in women than in men. There are a number of possible explanations for why women are more likely to report fearing social situations. First, it's possible that men are actually more anxious in social situations than they are willing to admit. For example, evidence from studies of other phobias suggests that men underestimate their levels of fear. Second, there is research suggesting that parents are more likely to accept and even reward shyness and associated negative emotions, for example, sadness, fear, in girls than in boys. There also may be differences in the types of social situations that men and women fear. One study found that men with social anxiety disorder were more fearful than women of urinating in public bathrooms or returning items to stores, whereas women were more fearful than men of talking to people in authority, public speaking, being the center of attention, expressing disagreement, and throwing a party. Another study found that men with social anxiety disorder were more likely than women to fear dating and to use alcohol or drugs to relieve social anxiety. Women in this study were more likely than men to seek medication treatment for their social anxiety. How does social anxiety affect people's lives? In this section, we will discuss how a person's social anxiety can affect relationships, work and school, and day-to-day activities. After listening to each section, take a few moments to consider whether and how your social anxiety affects each of these areas of your life. Relationships. Social anxiety can make it difficult for people to establish and maintain healthy relationships. It can affect all types of relationships, from those with strangers and casual acquaintances to those with family members and significant others. For many people, even the most basic forms of social interaction, such as making small talk, asking other people for directions, saying hello to a neighbor, are very difficult. For some people, dating may be completely out of the question. Social anxiety may be more manageable around familiar people, such as close friends and family members, but not always. Sometimes anxiety may actually increase as a relationship becomes more intimate. Also, social anxiety can interfere with existing relationships, particularly if a socially anxious person's partner wants to socialize with others on a regular basis. The following case examples illustrate how social anxiety can have a negative impact on relationships. Amir has never been in a romantic relationship. Although others have expressed interest in dating him, he always makes excuses not to go out and usually doesn't return their texts and phone calls. Amir desperately wants to be in a relationship, but he just can't find the courage to take the initial steps. Elena is generally comfortable with her male colleagues at work, and she has several male friends with whom she socializes occasionally. However, as her relationships with men develop closeness, she becomes increasingly fearful that the other person will discover the real Elena and reject her. She has ended several relationships with men just as they were becoming close. Matteo frequently argues with his girlfriend about his unwillingness to spend time with her friends. Although he was quite shy and anxious when they first started dating, his social anxiety has started to put more of a strain on their relationship. Because of his anxiety, they spend a lot of time alone, but she wants to socialize as a couple with other people. James has gradually lost many of his friends over the years. After finishing high school, he kept in touch with his closest friends for a while. However, because of his anxiety, he often dreaded returning their calls and almost never accepted invitations to get together. Eventually, his friends stopped calling him. Allison's roommate consistently plays loud music after midnight, making it impossible for her to sleep. Despite feeling very frustrated and angry, Allison avoids asking her roommate to turn down her music for fear that her words won't come out right or that her roommate will think she's an idiot. When talking to people whom she doesn't know well, Ella tends to speak very quietly, keep her distance, and avoid eye contact. As a result, people at work have started to leave her alone, and they rarely invite her to lunch anymore. Record the ways that social anxiety has affected your friendships and relationships. Education and career. Significant social anxiety can have an impact on a person's education and career. It can affect the types of courses you take in school and the types of jobs you might take. It can also affect performance as well as your enjoyment of school or work. Consider the following case examples. Naveen turned down a promotion at work that involved significant supervisory responsibilities, including chairing a weekly staff meeting and training groups of staff. Although the promotion would have provided him with a significant increase in salary, Naveen was terrified of speaking in front of groups, and he couldn't imagine being able to lead the weekly meetings. Ruth dropped out of college partway through her third year. As a freshman and sophomore, she had been able to be anonymous in her large classes.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?